Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Van Helsing. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're picking up with Ivory, Violet, as well as some of the Sisterhood, the remnants that are left. Mira, Zuma, and Claire. And obviously they're kind of sitting around kind of having fun talking about like, oh, right, when was their first time? And it's just like being with someone. And it's like, oh, yeah, like she's like, yeah, I've had 2 or 3. And Claire's like 2 or 3 at a time. And it's like, oh, you need to try it. So they're kind of, it's like, oh, asking, Violet when's her first time. It's like, oh, yeah, what kind of happens at military school? You kind of keep it at military school. So that was interesting. But obviously we're also picking up with the creature that the Dark One sent after them last episode. In particular, it's after the amulet, the rest of her power. It's a creature known as a Vanator. And at first, they're not sure what it is, because initially what sets this off is they end up finding Claire's body, but it's like her heart's cut out. And I immediately was thinking to myself, it's like, oh, it looks like she cut her own heart out. Now, I'm wondering about that later on, but we'll kind of circle back to that. But, initially, looking at it, it's kind of their signature. So, Ivory knows that, like, there's nearby, like, vampires known the desert vampires. That's their way of kind of sparking, like, saying, like, oh, this is their territory. It's kind of interesting. I guess that means just, like, Ivory, just over the years, has had interactions with all the different, like, vampire groups that are just kind of scattered around. It's just interesting to think about. I mean, to be fair, she is pretty old, so it's like she would have been around long enough to really know the ins and outs, especially kind of being part of the Sisterhood. And Michaela, I think, probably gives you a little bit more reach than, like, normal vampires. But nevertheless, Ivory's initially, like, consumed by revenge, because for her, it's like, I need to get revenge for what happened to Claire, but also at the same time, it's also because, like, she can do something about this. It's like, she feels like it's this on top of the whole Jack situation, too. It's just a lot happening all at once. But I think it's, like, at least the Jack thing, she can't do anything right now. At least getting justice, or rather revenge for Claire, she can do that now. Obviously, it's a situation where, for her, it's like, she has very few sisters left. And she actually talks about it a little bit, that there was once upon a time, she would have sent them, just sent previous sisters to, like, charging head first into death, and she never really batted an eye. But now that she's human, she cares about all of them. It's like the bond that they had as vampires still kind of exists. And I think that's actually kind of an interesting and complicated thing, because, like, as vampires, you're not supposed to really have connections, but obviously they have connections with each other as vampires, as part of, it's more so like as this sisterhood, like, oh, we serve our mother Michaela. It's more so that connection rather than like a friendship or a real, like, sisterhood bond. But it's interesting because you're humans now, and you're feeling this connection that you've had for, like, hundreds of years, because you guys have been vampires for that long. So it's really interesting when you think about that, like, holding human connections for a point in your life when you connected with people when you didn't feel anything. I think that's so interesting when you actually think about that. And I think that in itself can kind of speak volumes about, because later on, Vampire ended up grabbing Mira, and she didn't do anything. And then she you have Ivory kind of like yelling down, kind of disciplining her, and being like, what were you doing? How could you do that? You're supposed to be a warrior. You're part of the Sisterhood. But then, Violet has to remind her, it's like, she's human, so maybe you should get used to, maybe you should know that side of her, because it's like, right, all you've ever known of her was her vampire side. You've never gotten the opportunity to really know her as a human. None of you really have. And then, to a certain extent, and then, like, they sit down and talk, and we learn that, like, Zuma and Ivory go way back. Until, like, back when they originally, because they used to live, like, a few doors, like, a few houses away from each other. Because we've actually gotten to look at Ivory's past in the past. In season 2, it was the episode where we saw Dimitri, Scab, and Ivory all being, like, tested by their own past and their own fears, kind of being used against them as, like, a trial. So we got a peek into that, but we got a little bit more understanding. Obviously, it was a situation of, like, oh, you're supposed to, like, after they slaughtered so many people, Ivory's dad, Zuma's brothers and dad, and it's like, they wanted them to convert, but they refused to, and hence the burning at the stake thing. It's like, how did you survive? It's like, Michaela came from the shadows and brought, quote-unquote, salvation, And, even Mira being like, whoa, I never knew any of that about any of y'all. Because once again, kind of showcasing, like, we never knew each other beforehand. Because, like, as vampires, why would we care about our lives beforehand? It's like, because being a vampire kind of puts you in a haze. You lose who you were. You have some knowledge of who you were. Like, obviously, like, we've seen that where, like, vampires, like Susan, for example, using her knowledge as a vampire to kind of poke and prod at Vanessa in season 1 type of situation. It's kind of like, it can be used in that regard, but who you were, like everything that kind of made you kind of gets collapsed in this haze of darkness. And then it's like, Ivory's like, so when did Michaela change you? And Mira's like, Michaela? And at that moment I was like, Ivory changed her, she just doesn't know it. And obviously things kind of escalate and get worse. Because obviously all this talk about the past, Zuma kind of walks away. Because it's overwhelming. Because truth be told us, they all haven't been human for that long. Ivory's been human a little longer than him. Once again, we don't know the time frame between certain episodes. Even like, some of the time frame in between Michaela and Jack Ivory and Jack going after Michaela, like after the whole, her getting turned back into a human. We don't know what that time frame was. But it is, because at least it's like, because unlike a lot of people, like, Doc was a vampire for, like, wasn't it like a year or something like that? But yes, there were still some kind of drawbacks to it. Scab had been one for, like, 3 years. Phil had been one for, not Scab, I meant to say Flesh. Phil was one for, a couple years. So it's like, the longer you are, it seems like the more it takes to kind of adjust. I don't know, it didn't seem like it took too long for Julius to adjust back. I thought it was kind of fascinating. Cause I think that's something they haven't really showed, because the reason why I'm bringing that up, because they never really showcased, like, being human again, all those emotions. Like, I mean, it's pretty obvious because, like, everyone gets really emotional, like, oh my god, I mean, to be fair, Julius kind of acted on his emotions by like, yo, let me go with you, Vanessa, you saved my life, and it's like, I owe you, so, like, let me kick it with you to make up for everything I've done. So, but I think it's like, the shorter amount of time you've been a vampire, the less that, like, emotional overload hits you. But like, because when you've basically been burying your emotions for centuries, in like Michaela's case as well as like the other sister's case. So like, obviously that's why Zuma was just like, hearing about her past is just like, yeah, it's making me sad and heartbroken all over again. I need to take a while. I need to go get something to drink, because it's just too much. Everyone's kind of feeling it. That's why like Ivory's getting so like heated, why she's so desperate for revenge, why she's so angry, because like, I'm feeling emotions. It's kind of new for her, so she's flaring up and stuff like that, because it's a tiny bit of who she was as a vampire kind of coming through, because she's kind of been in command and stuff like that, so she's kind of talking in that manner. But also it's just because her emotions are on a heightened level. And that's interesting, because like, because obviously this depicts vampires as being emotionless, they have no feelings, but like, I think in the Vampire Diaries, like, in that universe, packs that, it's not only like your hearing or your senses, it's actually even your emotions kind of get heightened. I think when you get consumed by rage, you go into a bloody red rage and you can't see anything else. I don't know, I'm overthinking it probably, but I think it's just a fascinating thing. Sadly, Zuma gets controlled by the Vaninator, and I think I said the word. Was it just a Vanator? Is what it was. Sorry, I said Vaninator. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Sorry. Getting controlled by the creature, and it's like wanting the at the end of the day, like Mira froze again, and ultimately ended up being Ivory who had to do it, and she ended up cutting off Zuma's head, killing her. And it's just to think of like, oh my god, I killed my sister. Her hands are shaking. Once again, her emotions are in a heightened state. Plus this, it's just, being human kind of sucks in moments like this. Especially considering her and Zuma go back, like Zuma's like a connection to her past and everything. But with all this, like, the reason why this seems so familiar to figuring out what this thing does, that basically it kind of gets inside your head, especially because I think I can't remember if it's, it was beforehand, that she remembered that Michaela tried to summon one of these, like, for over, like, a couple decades, but she never could, so it means the Dark One's kind of done it, kind of realizing, like, right, the Dark One got some of her power back, and now she's trying to get the rest of it. Mira kind of confides in the fact is, I think this is actually later on, she confides in the fact is that she's scared, because it's just emotional overload, like, because she even talked about it, like, as a vampire, you have nothing to fear, you have no fear at all, but also, like, you're pretty indestructible, and you're just kind of like, you feel like the top of the food chain, like, nothing can stop you, so that feeling of superiority and also not having the actual feeling of fear, now having that back in folds, it can be overwhelming. So I just think that's kind of an interesting thing on that part. But obviously it's like, let's use our blood to mark our territory so that the Venator can't get in here. Because obviously it's not going to stop, because this thing doesn't stop. The only thing that keeps it at bay is daylight, so they have to wait until dawn so they can get out of here. But also this thing can't be killed. But obviously it's good at getting inside your head. I'm wondering, well, it seems like it's able to do it just naturally, because it's able to just take what it senses in you and uses it against you. Because I was wondering, because it came from the Dark One, and the Dark One was able to kind of seep into Jack. But there's also another part of me that's like, this thing is from the darkness, and obviously all of them have been kind of touched by the darkness to a certain extent. More specifically, Jack has, so that was kind of easy to kind of get to Violet that way. And I was wondering, is that how it got to Mira? But it's like, no, I'm sure it just kind of like psychically gets inside of your head, finds your weakness, and kind of uses it against you. In Violet's case, it ended up being Jack. Luckily, Ivory it seems like that's kind of the solution in that regard, is like basically temporarily kill the person. That's how you kind of break the hold. By stabbing Violet in the heart, she was able to kind of break the hold. So when Violet does snap back and come back, she obviously for Ivory, like, you see her, and that's another thing. Seeing her scared and panicked in this episode is so weird, because we've never seen her like that before. She's always been so like forward charging, was always set in her mission. Once again, like, cause it's also because we've seen Ivory like that for most of the show. Obviously, that changed like near the end of last season, but it's like for mostly 4 seasons we saw Ivory a certain way. So to see her in another way like that after so long is so weird. To see her kind of like, fearful and scared and panicked. You never see that, because it's just not how vampires roll. But to see her like that, emoting like that, it's kind of crazy. Because she was worried, because it's like, not only did I kill Violet, potentially our only means of not only saving Jack, but stopping the Dark One. So, but luckily everything worked out. So, but Mira's kind of, ends up opening up, when it's like, what she's really scared of is Ivory. It's like, yeah, you might not be that monster anymore, but when I close my eyes and I look at you, all I ever see is a monster who came in and killed my family and turned me. Like, the fact is that you don't even remember, and even Ivory's like, wait, what? Like, and that's for her, that's what hits her so hard later on. It's like, there were so many that I don't remember, because hearing her tell that story kind of made me a little reminiscent of, like, Phil, when he killed his daughters and left his wife, alive to kind of suffer from that. Obviously, it's a different case in Mira's case, because she was turned into a vampire sometime after, so she probably didn't have the proper time to fully grieve everything. I mean, it was all happening, but like, it's interesting because those were her last emotions as a human. Obviously, she didn't have time to really jump on that, because it's like, I'm human again, but now it's like, now that these emotions are creeping back in and they're flooding in, and they're like super hyper-dized and everything, so it's like, they're in a very heightened state. Like, now is when she's kind of feeling the way she's feeling about Ivory. It might have been there a little bit last season, because I'm pretty sure she's the one that they got. Maybe it was a different sister, but I think that's Amira's supposed to be the one that helped them last episode, like pretending like the distracted guards while like they snuck in season near the end of season 4. Like, I believe that was Mira, but maybe I'm not remembering correctly. I did rewatch season 4, but that was like a couple weeks ago, so I don't remember. But I just thought that was so fascinating. Just kind of like that, and obviously processing all of that, for Ivory, because it's like, right, it's like, I don't remember like all that I've done. I mean, a lot of vampires do a lot of damage without, and it wasn't them. I'm sure there's still a part of them that feels like, the vampire side just brings out your darker stuff. So it's like, that was already there within you. Like, that's the argument. I don't think that's the case, but you never, I'm sure the particular people who were vampires probably feel more like that, but you never know. But, sadly, Mira was possessed by, the Venator, and it was able to get to them, and obviously they're trying to talk her down. In particular, Ivory is. It's like, no, you don't have to do this. Fight it. Fight the fear and everything. But Mira, like, she did fight it up to a certain extent. She put the swords to her neck, and she's like, Ivory, when I look at you, I don't see the monster anymore. Just to kind of ease her mind to be like, I might have said what I said, but you aren't that monster anymore. It's okay. I know you're the different person. I know this is who you really are. And she kills herself. And Ivory blames herself because it's like, I set this all in motion. It's on me. I'm the one that changed her. I did that to her family, and I don't even remember because there were just so many. She was so steeped in that darkness, and that's something she's trying to explain to Violet. It's like, you don't know what it's really like. You've never had to live in that darkness for centuries. It's like, yeah, you've been surrounded by the darkness and what it kind of took from you that it took. You know, you watched your dad fight who he was and die in front of you. You watched the Dark One seep into Jack and take her from you. But it's like to feel it in yourself, to feel it in your core, like Ivory as well as sisters have. Because that's also another thing too. It's like, I'm the last of my sisters, you know. These were my sisters regardless of everything. We had this bond. Yeah, we were vampires, but it was still like, you know, because she talked about the fact is like everything had been taken from her. Like her life had been previously taken from her. It's like, I was going to have children. I was going to make my mom a grandmother. And, you know, it's just like, you know, that darkness took so much away from her, and now it's continuing to do so. So Jack, figuring like the only way to stop this is the Dark One to stop it, but she's not going to do it. So Violet decides she's going to take the darkness in herself, because if that power in there is the Dark One, so it's like, if I can get control over it, and maybe I can stop the Venator, which obviously it's like, yeah, they could also go sideways, but she does it anyway, and she's able to. It doesn't seem like you just straight up returned the Venator. It seems like you killed it. Like, I don't know if that's how you're supposed to naturally dispel the spell by killing the Venator, because it like there's a light that pops up inside of it and it explodes and dies. So it's like, maybe that's just how you send it back to the realms of the darkness. Is kind of like, yep, that's just straight up killing it. Whatever the case may be, luckily Violet was able to kind of seal the darkness back in. So now dealing with all the aftermath of all of this, it's like, Violet now understands that darkness, having experienced it firsthand. But they do make some interesting discoveries where they look in a book where it's like, oh, here's a picture of Jack. It's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Jack, right, like, why is she here? And it's like, oh, that's because she time traveled and everything. Maybe she's the one responsible for these things changing, like why the Dark One's power is here. It has to explain everything, because it's like, yeah, because this page definitely wasn't here in the book beforehand. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. So, but there's also some coordinates now. Where those coordinates will take them? Because Violet's like, yeah, it's on the East Coast, and I'm like, wondering, will it have something connected to, like, maybe it's kind of a secret place or something that's connected to them, or maybe in particular connected to, like, their dad, you know, Hanson/Willem. But they're dead set on stopping the darkness now, because at the end of the day, this has cost them a lot. She's lost Jack, Vanessa, obviously Ivory's lost her sister, so they've kind of, you know, now they have a direction to kind of go. They're setting on their path, because it's like they have to stop the Dark One, but it's like, necessarily, how do you do that? Especially when she's parading around to be the most powerful woman in the world too. So I meant to talk about this and bring it up earlier in the episode, because it was something I was thinking about. This episode was just a structure of just like them being hunted down like that, and it kind of being like a haunted house situation to a certain extent. It kind of reminded me. Because there's only because yes, it's a very horror, but it's never scary. That like, just like the nature of like them being trapped like this, it reminded me of the Asylum in season 3, when it's Scarlet, Axel, Vanessa, and the Elder. God, I'm always forgetting his name. The first Elder they cross paths with, the one that she's kind of in control of. Well, Scarlet and him, he kind of answers to Scarlet and Vanessa. But that the Asylum where Lily's body was, as well as that psychic vampire, it kind of reminded me a little bit of that episode, and just tonally in that regard. So, yeah, actually, you know, a very sad episode, but a lot of interesting realizations as well. You know, I mean, maybe that speaks volumes. The fact is that Yeah, well, I think I keep doing that. Violet was able to control the darkness to a certain extent. Granted, if it stayed inside of her too long, it'd probably become an issue. But she was able to fight it and kind of control it for a bit. So maybe that's going to be necessary in stopping the Dark One. We'll see. I'm also curious, like I said, about the Jack situation. I'm like circling back to find out like what that is going to be like. You know, is she going to find a way back to her time? You assume so. Once again, the trailer for the season was like 30 seconds, and I watched it like, what's that, like over a month ago maybe? So I don't remember, like there was a lot of fast-paced touch, and I don't want to necessarily know, so I'm trying to remember if there was anything off the top of my head that should said it. Like I said, I don't want to know, I'm just trying to I'm just curious, you know, where that's going to go. Of like, how would she find a way back, especially because there was a date for her death and everything, so it's like, oh. But also it said like 2017, 78. Like I didn't know how to like necessarily take that, like which I thought was kind of, but I guess it was like more so like, no, those are like the coordinates and everything. But I think that date itself was supposed to be the coordinates, maybe. I don't know. Or maybe that's supposed to be the date she died, which would also, maybe that speaks volumes or something. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that's the number they were referencing. I didn't remember seeing any other number on the page, but regardless. I'm curious. Because that's right. Because she did say at the end of that, at the end of episode 3, she did say she was going to go back home to America. It's like, yeah, it wasn't her time, but that also explains like why specifically coordinates on the East Coast. It does beg the question. Well, I was about to say, nevertheless, I was about to go on a tangent, but it's not important. I'm really interested to see where everything ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.